It's my nerd world. Welcome to it, the Star Wars Reporter. We have a ton of news to get to this week. Qi'ra returns in a Boba Fett comic, and it's kind of a big deal. The writer of the new Star Wars film with producer Kevin Feige speaks out about his writing process. He's also the writer of Loki. More JJ Abrams talk from Collider, getting into plans. Were there plans for the sequel? Weren't there plans? I'll break it all down. Plus, more Rise of Skywalker talk. Comics, daggers, wayfinders, and more. Plus, your listener feedback. I am really excited to welcome to this week's Star Wars Reporter podcast a brand new sponsor. I'll have more details coming up later on in the show, but welcome to Enso Rings. EnsoRings.com. That's ENSO Rings.com. They've teamed up with Star Wars for some amazing silicone rings that I cannot wait to share with you details about and how you can get some deep discounts on these amazing Enzo Star Wars rings. So, thank you so much for checking out the show this week. Let's go ahead and get right to it.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you?
I'm no one. There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
My nerd world.
Just let it in.
You know, there's this line of thinking that fans, the public, they hate the newest thing until the next thing comes along. And it doesn't always ring true, right? It's not what you would kind of refer to as a universal truth, but there is a level of truth to it. I only mention it because we'll be talking about the Rise of Skywalker later on in the show, because we have a lot of ground to cover. But I really look forward to the day when we have more Star Wars that the fandom can go and discuss and get upset about, and we've put some distance on the sequel trilogy, because, and I'm not not alone in this thought process. I actually heard this recently on another Star Wars podcast, but like them, I'm looking forward to when we're down the line 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, and we've got more Star Wars movies to discuss, and people begin to look back on the sequel trilogy the way that the fans do now with the prequels. It really is fun for me as a diehard Star Wars fan to see the attitude towards the prequels come around and how they are a product of their time. But there is something very special and unique about that trilogy, and I absolutely believe that is also the case with the sequel trilogy, of which I love just as much as I love the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. I think time and more Star Wars content is what it's going to take for people to come around on those particular series of movies. So I don't want to waste any more time, and I want to dive into what we have this week on the show. Before I get to the news items, I'll just mention briefly my continued thoughts about The Bad Batch. Recently, I believe those in charge of the music for The Bad Batch had tweeted out that starting this week, things are about to take a turn on the show, and that fans are going to be really excited to see where the show goes. I believe we're hitting the midway point. And the past few episodes have been a bit episodic. I don't want to say filler. I don't like using that word because I feel like it doesn't give enough credit to the writers, the directors, the producers, and the voice actors of these shows, and especially those that are crafting the story. Because while there are sort of doing that thing with my fingers, filler episodes, there are things that happen in the episodes that are crucial to advancing the story, and that's been the case in every single episode of The Bad Batch. But that being said, these would sort of fall into that looser category of filler shows, even though they are propelling the story forward. So I'm really excited to see what the second half of the season has in store. I feel like the show got off to a really, really good start for me personally. And while I've enjoyed it every week, I have not been as excited after every episode as I was over the debut long episode and the second episode. But again, I understand for these series to work, you're going to have to get in and just tell some individual stories to propel things along. And it seems like from what people are saying around the edges of the Bad Batch that things are about to really ramp up on the show. And I'm really, really excited to see where everything goes. All right, let's go ahead and dive into, we got a lot of news this week. Let's go ahead and get to it.
We have a spark that'll light the fire that'll burn the First Order down.
Now, I, Jon Justice, am not a big comic book reader. I sort of pick up the issues that I hear people talking about that I'm interested in rather than diving in to an entire series. Sometimes I may find an issue and go, oh, that's really cool, like the Darth Vader issue, and go back and watch and then go back and read other past issues. And I'm referring to the Darth Vader issue where number 11, where Darth Vader goes to Exegol. From comicbook.com, though, just this week, fans got a pretty unexpected surprise. When Solo's Qi'ra made an appearance in Star Wars War of the Bounty Hunters #1. Now, there's spoilers here, so if you haven't read the comic, I'm just going to tell you to skip ahead a couple of minutes because we are going to get into some spoilers here, and I probably should have put that warning on before I mentioned that Qi'ra shows up in this Bounty Hunters comic, so my apologies if I spoiled it for you, but I'm not going back in time. The reveal that Qi'ra is still alive during the events of the comic, which occur between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, was definitely a pleasant surprise to readers, and also to Emilia Clarke herself, while speaking with the actress about her upcoming Image Comics miniseries, Mother of Madness, which publishes its first issue next month. Comicbook.com asked her about Qi'ra's surprise return in War of the Bounty Hunters. Clarke revealed and said this: "It means so much. It means the absolute world. I know her backstory. I know her story. Maybe the movie didn't get to go there, but that was such an honor and a privilege to be a part of that universe as an actor." So then to see the character actually be taken on to the origin of it all, of all of it, bringing it home to the family in that way, cemented it in a way. I was not expecting to feel as moved as I was by that. In War of the Bounty Hunters #1, it was revealed that Qi'ra is directly tied to the crime syndicate Crimson Dawn, which she developed an alliance with across the events of the Solo movie. More than a decade after the events of the film, it's clear she's still a pivotal player in the organization, and that she still has a connection to Han Solo, who she grew up alongside on the streets of Corellia. Given the fact that a hypothetical Solo sequel would have dealt with a war between Crimson Dawn, the Hutt Cartel, and the Pike Syndicate, this comic appearance provides fans with the best indication yet of Qi'ra's overall arc in the Star Wars universe. The one thing about this particular piece of content that I think is... So what is the larger implications of Qi'ra showing up in this Boba Fett comic, right? I think the larger implications of this is that we probably won't be seeing Qi'ra in any live action settings anytime soon. I know that the Bob Chapek, who took over for Bob Iger at Disney, had a slip of the tongue when he was talking about shows that were in development. And at one point he said there was a Han Solo show in development when he kind of slipped and said, there's a Boba Fett, the book of the book of Boba Fett coming out. I don't make too much of that. These characters are also top of mind for individuals, except for the fact that perhaps he was alluding to not a Han Solo live action show, but maybe Han Solo makes an appearance in the book of Boba Fett. But getting back to Qi'ra and Emilia Clarke, the fact that they included her and the story group allowed a comic to include her that far away, right, from the timeline of when we saw her in Solo, it kind of leads me to believe that we won't be seeing her in live action anytime soon. If we do, then this particular appearance, given that it's between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, I think could bring about an appearance in material after Return of the Jedi. So it could be laying the groundwork of, okay, we're going to have her in, say, the next season of Mandalorian, or maybe she's going to show up in the Book of Boba Fett, which would make sense. Therefore, they know that it's okay to include her with Crimson Dawn in that particular time period in the comic book because they already know that she's going to be showing up in these future projects that are set after when the comic book is set. So I guess to be more specific, I think this proves somewhat that they're probably, well, not proves, but it points to there not being any pre-A New Hope around Solo content, but potentially content after Return of the Jedi, which would be the timeline of which most of the live-action shows, apart from Andor, are falling into. So, as always, what do you think? You going to check the comic book out? Does this excite you? I just like to see this character show back up. I thought she was great. I, like most people, I'm a huge fan of Solo, and especially her character. So the fact that they're including a character like this and sort of keeping her alive within the fandom, I just think is really, really cool. talkshownerd@gmail.com is the email address, talkshownerd@gmail.com, or as always, you can leave a comment up on YouTube. Got a couple of news items here from Collider. This one came out just a few days ago. Loki head writer Michael Waldron on what it's like writing a Star Wars movie for producer Kevin Feige. He also answers the question of which one's better, A New Hope or The Empire Strikes Back. That's subjective. So, the article goes like this. Here's a few points. Currently, the next Star Wars movie on the docket is a film called Rogue One, directed by Patty Jenkins. There was some news that came out about that where she had hired, I think, one of the same art directors that she used for Wonder Woman 1984, and while I wasn't a huge fan of that film, art direction, I'm fine with that. The article goes on to say, there's a couple of other curiosities in the works, although details are under lock and key. A movie to be directed by Taika Waititi, a movie based on an idea by Marvel Studio president Kevin Feige that Feige will produce. It's the latter where Michael Waldron comes in, as he was tapped to write this sequence Star Wars movie for Feige and Lucasfilm. And for those that may have missed it on previous episodes, Feige is, from what we know, at least what's told in the public, is kind of a bigger fan, or was a bigger fan of Star Wars before he got the gig being the lead guy for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So, when Collider's Stephen Weintraub spoke with Waldron recently during an extended exclusive interview, he asked the writer about his Star Wars movie. Understandably, he was tight-lipped on the details, but couldn't contain his excitement. Waldron said this, "Look, that's a very exciting thing. My life has been very wrapped up in Doctor Strange and in Loki. I love Star Wars, and that's really exciting. I'm excited to keep working with Kevin, and I'm excited to work with Lucasfilm and Kathleen Kennedy. I mean, it's like, are you kidding me? They've made all my favorite movies. So yeah, I'm lucky. And hopefully Loki and Doctor Strange 2 don't come out and people don't hate it and say, wait a minute, he can't do this." By the way, I think it's interesting in there where he talked about how excited he was to work with Lucasfilm and Kathleen Kennedy. She's not going anywhere. Waldron said it's early days on the project, adding that he and Feige are excited to get going, but declined to offer specifics in terms of how far along the script is. But he did answer one key question, which is better, A New Hope or The Empire Strikes Back? To which Waldron said this, "Oh, wow, I mean, I would put Empire as number one. I love A New Hope. But Empire has the love story. It's got the Rebel fleet, the Han and Leia theme, which is my favorite musical cue in the whole thing. And it's got the tragedy. The gang is split up. Yeah, that's my favorite. It's not a very original answer, but I think The Empire Strikes Back is a perfect blockbuster movie. But his love for A New Hope runs deep, largely thanks to C-3PO. Where A New Hope gets me is A New Hope has the stuff with 3PO and R2 at the beginning, which I love. I'm a big 3PO guy. I love 3PO, and he's got a lot to do in the first act of A New Hope, and I always love the first part of A New Hope because of that. Something very interesting has been happening with Disney and Lucasfilm, and it wasn't until I read that article from Collider that my mind started to go down this particular path. And it was partly because I was listening to another podcast, and you got to forgive me, I can't remember which one it was. It was either Talking Pain 94 or Around the Galaxy, one of the interviews they did, because they both had some really good interviews as of late. But they were talking to a content creator, and they were talking about the sequel trilogy. And one of the hosts or the guests got into the timeline of which Disney and Lucasfilm wanted to go and put out these movies after they bought Disney they bought Lucasfilm and Star Wars from George Lucas. So that purchase took place in 2012, and Bob Iger said he wanted a movie out by 2015. So they moved really quickly. Well, as we all know, they went on this abbreviated schedule compared to how the original trilogy was released and the sequel trilogy was released. Now, depending on your point of view about the sequel trilogy, there are certainly arguments out there that these films were rushed. I think the only one that you could, in my opinion, argue with any kind of merit in terms of it being rushed, although I did hear an argument about The Last Jedi, and I'll share that, is maybe The Rise of Skywalker. Because of all the production work that went into the Colin Trevorrow version of that film before Carrie Fisher passed away, and then the movie was handed back over to JJ Abrams, that was still slated for a May 2019 release, to which JJ said, let's push it to December because he wanted a little bit more time. I think most of us agree that The Force Awakens came out good. It would be interesting to see what would have happened if they'd had more time, but it doesn't seem like time was really that big of a factor, apart from Michael Arndt, who was the original screenwriter. So I'm kind of all over the place. Let me zero in on this, and I'll just kind of work through the sequel trilogy and get to my point. So Michael Arndt, the writer of Little Miss Sunshine, was, if you watch the documentary for The Force Awakens, he was originally tapped to write The Force Awakens. And he told Kathleen Kennedy he was going to need a couple years to go and do this. And Kathleen Kennedy on the documentary even said, well, we were hoping that he would get finished up even faster, but he didn't. So when they handed the reins over to JJ Abrams and he brought in Lawrence Kasdan, they did a lot of writing on the fly. And the documentary shows that, of them actually writing, out. They wrote the script, but they improvised a lot and changed a lot along the way. And then, of course, Harrison Ford got injured with the door falling on his leg, and they had a bunch of time, and some things ended up changing during that process. Rian Johnson was writing The Last Jedi in the middle of when J.J. Abrams was still shooting The Force Awakens, okay? So I understand the argument that some people have about things being rushed. Again, depending on how you feel about the sequel trilogy, right? Either it was, and you don't like those films, and you think that's part of the problem as to why you don't like them and think they would have been better if they'd had more time. Or if you're like me and you like the sequel trilogy, you go, no, I mean, they didn't have as much time as they normally do, but I love all three of those films. So why am I bringing all this up? I'm bringing all this up because I don't think that Disney and Lucasfilm are going to be making that mistake again. When you look at the number of films that are in production, and there's a Twitter account that I follow called the Space Shipper, and I actually have notifications turned on for him because he tweets out stuff about spaceships and all kinds of movies, and he tweets out quite a bit of stuff about Star Wars as well. So he had posted a tweet this week, and he was tweeting out about gaming, Star Wars gaming, and made the comment, and I agree, that if they are going to be developing a video game for Rogue Squadron, which doesn't come out until December of 2023, then they're probably knee-deep into production and pre-production work on that film. We know, as that article mentioned from Collider, we've got this Kevin Feige movie produced by that's in the works. We have the Taika Waititi movie that's also in the works, along with Patty Jenkins' Rogue One, and obviously those other films at this point in time, unless they tell us differently, are going to be released after the Rogue Squadron film is. What I think is happening here is that Disney is giving these writers and these directors on these films a wide berth to flesh out these stories moving forward. I wouldn't be surprised to see, even though I have no idea what the order is supposed to be of these films, specifically Taika Waititi and Kevin Feige's produced movie. But I'm going to guess that we're going to get back to an abbreviated schedule of a Star Wars movie a year, even if they don't fall into the saga, right, type of storytelling. Maybe perhaps we'll get back at that. Maybe they'll be more interconnected. I don't anticipate 2 Star Wars movies a year. I think that Disney is probably really hesitant to do that based off of what happened with Han Solo, with the Solo movie. But I can foresee, because there are so many projects in the works already, and these writers and these directors and these producers seem to have a number of years to flesh these stories out, that starting with Patty Jenkins' film in 2023, that we will be getting another Star Wars movie every year after that. Now, I know there is a timeline that's out there that has dates for potential Star Wars movies to be released, and they have them separated. They have them separated out. But I think most people understand that those are more like guidelines of expectations of what they have so far, and all of that stuff is absolutely subject to change. So, again, talkshownerd@gmail.com. You can also leave a comment up on YouTube for next week's show. All right, before we get to our next news item, another article from Collider, JJ Abrams reflecting on Star Wars and when it's critical to have a plan, I have got to tell you about something that I found that I couldn't wait to share with you that every single Star Wars fan needs to have. I like unique Star Wars accessories, right? I've got my t-shirts, but I like, shoes and socks, things that are somewhat subtle, especially things that you can wear like every day. And the hardcore Star Wars fans or the Star Wars fans are going to recognize it even though you're at a business meeting, right? So what am I talking about? I'm talking about Enso Rings. Now, Enso is an industry leader in silicone rings, and they're really, really comfortable as well. Like, these are great. It's a high-quality wedding ring replacement, fashion accessory, or just to, like me, show off your love of Star Wars. Enso Rings has teamed up with Star Wars to make these amazing rings that are instant collector's items. You've got to check these out. They are the perfect gift for Father's Day. If you're looking for something unique and different for that Star Wars dad in your life, right, or any Star Wars fan in your life, you've got to check out these Star Wars Enso Rings. They come in The Mandalorian, Darth Vader, Grogu, R2-D2, C-3PO, and a Stormtrooper. They nailed the colors, especially on Grogu, which is one of my favorites next to the Mandalorian, which I'm wearing right now. R2-D2 and C-3PO, like, the colors alone make them instantly recognizable as R2-D2 and C-3PO, and they're going to make heads turn. And like I said, my favorite one right now is the Mandalorian one. I've been wearing it all weekend long. They're durable, they're going to last, and they're really, really comfortable too. These rings from Enso Rings are high-quality, 100% silicone. They're made right here in the USA at their facility in Utah. And again, they're perfect as wearing as high-quality wedding ring replacements or just showing off your love of Star Wars. You can buy them individually, or, like I did, you can get the entire limited edition collector's box, which comes in an actual collector's box. It really is amazing. I love unique Star Wars collectibles, and Enso really outdid themselves with this truly galactic collection. So, don't wait. Order your Enso Rings today for the Star Wars fan in your life. Perfect for Father's Day, including yourself. Go to EnsoRings.com, that's ENSO Rings.com, and get free shipping with the code Star Wars. Again, that's EnsoRings.com.
This is not going to go the way you think.
JJ Abrams reflects on Star Wars and when it's critical to have a plan. Yes, we're still talking about the sequel trilogy. All right, so here's the article from Collider. JJ Abrams was quoted as saying this: "I do think that there's nothing more important than knowing where you are going." JJ Abrams was never supposed to direct more than one film in the Star Wars franchise, right? When he first approached the idea about tackling Episode 7, he turned it down. It took some convincing, and then new Lucasfilm head Kathleen Kennedy's part to get Abrams to agree to sign on, and in doing so, Abrams said at the time that he was excited about the idea of creating a foundation from the ground up from which other stories might grow. Indeed, The Force Awakens had the unenviable task of introducing brand new characters that fans would want to follow while servicing fans' desires to see old favorites back on the screen. Abrams, co-writing the script with Lawrence Kasdan after Michael Harnt wrote the initial drafts, pulled it off, not only providing a satisfying conclusion to Han Solo's arc, but also making the world fall in love with Rey, Finn, Poe, BB-8, and etc. As Abrams was working on The Force Awakens, Lucasfilm wanted to get the next 2 films in the sequel trilogy off the ground and hired Rian Johnson to write and direct Episode 8 and Colin Trevorrow to co-write and direct Episode 9. The idea that each director would build on what the previous filmmaker had crafted, leading to a sort of creative handoff from one director to the next. In Johnson's case, that meant following certain threads that Abrams built, like Rey's confrontation with Luke Skywalker, and dropping others, like Snoke. The Last Jedi was a critical success, but it was divisive among some diehard fans, the article says, and it was, owing to some of these decisions to veer off when it looked like Abrams was plotting a course to the right. And again, this is where the subjectivity comes in, because I still feel like what Rian Johnson did was true to what JJ Abrams wanted to do. When we're talking specifically about the A-plot of the sequel trilogy, and I'll get into more of this in a minute. Let's get back to the article. So when Abrams signed on to take over for Episode 9 after Trevorrow left the project, he had another task, albeit a completely different one. He had to finish a story he started, but one that had taken some alternate routes in its middle chapter, routes that Abrams wouldn't have necessarily gone down. The resulting film, The Rise of Skywalker, was similarly divisive as JJ Abrams brought the story back around to some ideas he had percolating while making The Force Awakens, specifically owing to Rey's parentage. Now, the thing is, though, again, I addressed this in last week's show, specifically that there really wasn't any way that that film wasn't going to be divisive with YouTube and social media networking being what it is. So let me add something I didn't say before. Based off of how divisive The Last Jedi was, it was inevitable that The Rise of Skywalker would be divisive by the same people, since one side was always going to want to be disappointed. The thing that I thought was so unique about The Last Jedi was it started right after the end of The Force Awakens. And by the time we get to the end, we have a smaller rebellion. You could argue that. But at the same time, all that really happened was, and this isn't a dig, it's just, in my opinion, my reality of what happened in that movie. You had the growth of the main characters. You know, Finn, Poe, Rey, Kylo Ren, and Ben Solo. Okay, you had the growth of those main characters. And the only really big thing, well, there's 2 big things that JJ Abrams had to deal with. One was Snoke, I'll give you that, and Kylo Ren's helmet. Otherwise, it really was a film just about an emotional journey for these characters where by the end of the film, we still ended up in the same place kind of that we were at the end of The Force Awakens, minus Luke Skywalker. You still had the First Order trying to hunt down the Resistance/Rebellion, and the Rebellion/Resistance not knowing exactly what they were going to do. All right, let's get back to the article. So, personally, I enjoyed, the article writer says, I enjoyed the creative handoff between Abrams and Johnson. I like that The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi feel like distinct films, each following the themes and threads that these 2 different filmmakers sparked it to, but others blame this creative handoff for perceived problems with the sequel trilogy and claim it would have been better had Abrams and or Lucasfilm planned out the 3-movie arc from the very beginning. Now, look, I personally believe that's a lazy argument because you're never going to know what it could have been. And I know Star Wars is a different beast, but and maybe these arguments took place, but they certainly weren't surface level in sort of the public zeitgeist. But you don't see anybody going down and trashing the new Star Wars sequels. You know, JJ Abrams did the same thing. Like, he did the first one, and then he kind of set up the story in the second one, and it kind of gets that whole. And there's a whole setup in Into Darkness about this potential war that's brewing between the Klingons and the Federation. And then we get to Star Trek Beyond, if I said Star Wars, I apologize. I'm meaning Star Trek. If we get to Star Trek Beyond, they completely toss that idea out the wayside. I don't hear anybody complain about that. Nah. All right, let's get back to the article. So when I spoke to Abrams recently for Press Day, celebrating the 10th anniversary of his film Super 8, I asked him about this creative handoff. Specifically, does he feel the Star Wars trilogy would have benefited from having a plan from the very beginning? In answering, Abrams drew from his wealth of experience in television, and he said this: I've been involved in a number of projects that have been, in most cases, series, that have ideas that begin the thing where you feel like you know where it's going to go, and sometimes it's an actor who comes in, other times it's a relationship that as written doesn't quite work, and things that you think are going to just be so well received, just crash and burn, and other things that you like, oh, that's a small moment, or that's a one-episode character, suddenly become a hugely important part of the story. It feels like what I've learned as a lesson a few times now is it's something that, especially in this pandemic year, working with writers, has become clear. The lesson is that you have to plan things as best you can, and you always need to be able to respond to the unexpected. And the unexpected can come in all sorts of forms, but I do think there's nothing more important than knowing where you're going. Abrams acknowledged that sometimes the plan is the thing that gets in the way. There are projects that I've worked on where we had some ideas, but we hadn't worked through them enough. Sometimes we had some ideas, but then we weren't allowed to do them in the way we wanted to. I've had all sorts of situations where you plan things in a certain way, and suddenly you find yourself doing something that's 180 degrees different. And then sometimes it works really well, and you feel like, wow, that really came together. And other times you think, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is where we are. And sometimes when it's not working out, it's because it's what you planned. And other times when it's not working out, it's because you didn't have a plan. But ultimately, the filmmaker said that he's learned the hard way that it's better to have a plan or be willing or able to change it than not have one at all. You just never really know. But having a plan, as I've learned, is in some cases the hard way, is the most critical thing, because otherwise you don't know what you're setting up. You don't know what to emphasize, because if you don't know what the inevitable, if you don't know the inevitable of the story, you're just as good as your last sequence or effect or joke, but you want to be leading to somewhere inevitable. All right, look. In my opinion, they were leading to something inevitable, and I'm convinced they did have a plan. The main story, starting in TFA, was Rey and Ben Solo. Right? Rey and Kylo Ren. The Reylos were right, of which I kind of consider myself one, from the very beginning. Many people, before The Last Jedi came out, keyed in on those moments between Kylo Ren and Rey, and they were spot on. And that was consistent in The Last Jedi, and it was consistent in the Rise of Star Wars, in the Rise of Skywalker. Now you can argue, right, how those characters were handled. But it was the A plot of Rey and Kylo Ren / Ben Solo. Everything else was secondary. I know a lot of people are gravitating towards this article and saying that this is proof that JJ Abrams is admitting that it was critical to have a plan. Well, you know what? I didn't get that from that article. It seems like he was admitting both sides, both ends of the spectrum, meaning it is important to have a plan, but you also need to be able to adjust to changes in that plan as well. It really just comes down to how you end up feeling about the sequel trilogy. And I think J.J. Abrams worded himself very carefully in that to say, sure, it's important to have a plan, but at the same time, it's also important to be able to ditch that plan and deviate from it. And to say the sequel trilogy would have been better had they had more time between movies, or had they had a bigger plan, right? Again, in my opinion, is a lazy argument, because there's no way for you to ever know that. If you watch the Friends reunion, you will have found out, like I did, that Monica and Chandler's relationship, which started in the episodes in London, they hadn't planned on keeping them together. They were going to have them sleep together in London, but then after that, they weren't sure where it was going to go. It was never a plan to have them be this couple and have it grow. Now, it's unique because television in this case, had the unique ability to key in on the live studio audience and the episodic nature of the show to see that fans were really gravitating towards and liking Monica and Chandler being together. And therefore, they wrote the story and ended up making that relationship a lot bigger, and it became a really core component of Friends. But that wasn't part of the plan. Star Wars and films don't really have that luxury. I know they look at data, I know that they read the Reddit boards, but it's a heck of a lot different when you've got a weekly TV show and you can track your ratings directly and specifically to the audience to be able to immediately tell, oh, they really are gravitating towards this, than it is to go and craft a movie and not have any way of knowing how people are going to react to Rey saying Rey Skywalker at the end of that film. Spoiler alert. The article wraps up by saying this: he's not wrong, and his examples of working in TV are especially relevant. Breaking Bad had an overarching plan of taking a character from Mr. Chips to Scarface over the course of the series, but creator Vince Gilligan also planned on killing off Aaron Paul's Jesse Pinkman at the end of season 1. It was only after he saw Paul's chemistry with Bryan Cranston that he had to change his mind. And Jesse became an integral part of one of the best TV shows ever made. And on Lost, which Abrams worked on as a executive producer, sometimes writer and pilot director, showrunner Damon Lindelof revealed that ABC kind of forced their hand in making them extend the story beyond what they felt would have been right for the series. So, Abrams' thoughts here check out, and they come from years of experience working both with and without overarching plans. And listen, we're not really going to know, in my opinion. Getting back to a comment I made earlier. We're not really going to know what the overall general consensus is of The Rise of Skywalker, or The Last Jedi for that matter, until we get way further down the line. And we have other Star Wars content that people can go and make YouTube videos about and complain about. And I think then we're going to get a much better understanding of what the public actually feels and felt of the sequel trilogy. I seem to think that they liked it a lot more than what the fandom lets on. I think the box office numbers bear that out. I know that The Rise of Skywalker took a dip somewhat financially. Be that as it may, again, one of the biggest fan favorites of the Disney Star Wars era is Rogue One. And, you know, it made the least amount of money next to the Solo movie. So, again, you know, the numbers aren't always indicative of the fandom's response, and I think that's going to be the same case when it comes to the sequel trilogy down the line. One more last sort of bottom line for this particular Star Wars fan, Jon Justice. I don't care, right? And in my opinion, 7, 8, and 9 made narrative sense, and I love those 3 films dearly. Life is unpredictable. And what I mean by that is I know that the story didn't go the way that a lot of people thought it was going to go, but at the end of the day, life doesn't really go the way that people think that it's going to go. And looking at the Star Wars franchise from this lens of these are historical documents, right? I chalk it up to this is how things went in a galaxy far, far away.
Something inside me has always been there. But now it's awake. And I need help.
All right, so before we get into listener feedback this week, this is something that I had teased a couple episodes ago that I want to spend a little bit of time on, and that is the Rise of Skywalker IDW graphic novel. The artwork, especially for Rey in this graphic novel, is really, really cool. Again, I'm not the biggest comic book fan. I do have the Marvel version, and we'll talk a little bit about this in a moment. I have the Marvel version of The Last Jedi in comic book form. But I'll be honest with you, I like this aggressive, more stylized, cartoony style of the IDW graphic novel than what you get in most comics. You had the Marvel versions, which were a little bit more straightforward, what you would expect from comic book adaptations. IDW's publishing is geared a little younger, but the graphic novel for The Rise of Skywalker is quickly becoming one of my favorite little ancillary pieces of content from this story. Borg.com wrote up an article about this comic book, and I wanted to share it with you. Last year, it seemed like the idea of a graphic novel adaptation of the ninth and final Star Wars Skywalker film, The Rise of Skywalker, may not actually make it to print because of ongoing industry delays. And as a matter of fact, The Rise of Skywalker Marvel comic adaptation was canceled, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. But IDW Publishing got it done and is winding up its complete run of the adaptations of the franchise movies, which has already included the prequels, A New Hope, The Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, Force Awakens, Rogue One, The Last Jedi, and Solo. And listen, based off of the graphic style of these IDW Disney-era Star Wars products, I may get the whole series because it really, really is cool. All of them are in continuity and consistent in look and approach. IDW's take on the last movie lands with Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker, the graphic novel adaptation. The result continues the IDW series' more animated look at the films, reminiscent of the cartoon artwork of the original Clone Wars episodes. The article goes on to say, for all the convoluted story that appeared on the big screen in The Rise of Skywalker, people just can't help themselves, can they? This adaptation is surprisingly and refreshingly neat and clean and concise. It's not the photoreal work of Walt Simonson and past articles on similar projects created under Marvel Comics' umbrella, but it will appeal to fans of the animation art and fans of the third trilogy. The artwork around Rey, Rey and Kylo Ren, Ben Solo, but specifically Rey, the artwork around Rey is really, really cool. If you are just a passing fan of comics, but are a fan of The Rise of Skywalker, I definitely would encourage you to go out and pick up a copy. Right after you go to EnsoRings.com and get your Star Wars-themed Enso silicone rings. All right. As for the traditional completion of the Marvel version, last year it was canceled, unfortunately. From Star Wars Newsnet, back in February, Marvel announced that Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker would be getting a comic adaptation, much like the previous Star Wars movies released by Disney. The new run would be written by Jody Houser with art from Will Sliney. Apparently, that's no longer the case. Marvel has canceled the series. It was supposed to debut in June, but on April 1st, the company delayed the release, as well as many others, due to the COVID-19 pandemic. A month later, Marvel announced they would be resuming their release starting on May 27th, but The Rise of Skywalker #1 wasn't dated. No reason has been given for the cancellation, although it's possible that due to the complications from the pandemic, that's the reason why. Marvel has decided to axe some of their upcoming releases, including this one. Note, they also decided not to reprint The Rise of Kylo Ren #4. This comes as a disappointment to fans of these adaptations, which have proven to be insightful in the past. The Last Jedi one further explaining what was going on in Luke's mind throughout the story. The Rise of Skywalker comic adaptation also promised to expand on the movie. So far for now, we'll have to limit ourselves to what was added in the novelization of the film by Ray Carson. Which, by the way, on a secondary read, I ended up really enjoying. I didn't really care for it as much the first time around, but I'm spending some more time with it. I actually really enjoyed that novel now. In that novel, for example, it included the fact that a resurgent Palpatine was in a clone body. So again, it remains to be seen whether or not the comic adaptation of The Rise of Skywalker ends up seeing the light of day in a different way down the line. The article goes on to say they'll keep everybody updated if anything pops up. So, like I said, I promised on a previous episode that I was going to cover that. And I thought there were changes. I was wrong. I thought there were some storyline changes in the IDW Rise of Skywalker graphic novel that were different from the film, and I was wrong. It pretty much is a straight up adaptation of the movie. But again, I really, really would go and encourage you to check it out if you're a fan of the Rise of Skywalker. So one more last quick point as we do a little Rise of Skywalker talk, and then we'll dive into listener feedback. I just wanted to make this comment. I love the B and C plots of The Rise of Skywalker. And as a matter of fact, I actually like those B and C plots of The Rise of Skywalker more than The Last Jedi. I mean, I love both of those films, but the search for the wayfinders that leads to the dagger, it brings in a bit more of a fantasy element to the storytelling. I can absolutely see why some fans weren't down with that, okay? But I, for one, right, personally would have liked the wayfinders to be holocrons, but at the same time, I can kind of understand why they decided to call them wayfinders to be a little bit more specific than holocrons. I think you could have done it both ways. For example, though, Anakin in The Phantom Menace calls lightsabers laser swords, which always had me scratching my head, right? So if Anakin can call lightsabers laser swords in The Phantom Menace, then we can call essentially holocrons wayfinders in The Rise of Skywalker. I also like the fact that here you had Luke looking for the secret Sith world of Exegol, and he can't find it. So now Rey completes the journey that Luke Skywalker had started. And in the end, with his help, she goes and does what Luke probably would have done in finally defeating Palpatine once and for all. And again, that's only because of what Luke Skywalker was able to do in sacrificing himself in The Last Jedi. Again, it's that fun and rich, exciting storytelling, and another one of the many reasons why I love the sequel trilogy, and specifically the Rise of Skywalker. I really do feel like The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker complement each other really, really well, despite what the commentary might be among a lot of podcasters and YouTubes. And the reality is, one of the biggest issues with that is the lack of new things to discuss. It leaves a vacancy in the need for content that fuels coverage of things like JJ Abrams getting interviewed. If I were in charge of PR over at Disney and Lucasfilm, I would weekly put out tiny little nuggets of production updates from every possible angle on upcoming and ongoing projects. And you can do this without spoiling anything, right? It would largely be ignored by the mainstream media, and it would be covered at length by the hardcore fans, YouTubers and podcast producers. I still sort of scratch my head. I know, like, for example, we get the article that I mentioned about Michael Walden and his writing for the Kevin Feige movie, and we get some very general comments from him about the writing process. Let's assume for just a moment they know where in the timeline that movie is going to be, right? If he's writing the story, one has to assume that they've cemented the timeline. Certainly they've cemented the time frame of Rogue Squadron. Why can't you let that out into the public ether? Why not tell people? It's such a little nugget that could spark all kinds of conversation. I would love to sit down with the head of marketing for Star Wars, just Star Wars within Disney and Lucasfilm, and ask him, what's the rationale behind this? Why? I get to keep things secretive. I totally get that. But, for example, George Lucas, when he first started filming Attack of the Clones, and I still remember this, he had a word for it, and I can't remember. I'm sure somebody will email talkshownerd@gmail.com and tell me, but he had a word for it. But it was the George Lucas Selects. He would just release a photograph, and it could be anything. And I even remember what some of the pictures were. So one of the first ones was a blurry shot of Anakin running, and it was the scene when he is running after crashing the speeders on Coruscant, and he's running for the bar, and he's running through the crowd. I remember seeing an up-close, almost selfie of Shaak Ti, and I remember going onto the Force.net community board and writing a post with under commentary of that photo saying how I thought we were looking at our next Sith Lord to replace Darth Maul. There was also a photo, and I remember the caption. It was like wedgie it out, and it was this smooth surface, and on top of it was this wedge-shaped sort of ornate decoration that was kind of shaped like a Star Destroyer. You know what it was? It was decoration in the location on Alderaan. And this was actually a select that was taken because George Lucas did this during Revenge of the Sith. And as a matter of fact, I think the Shaak Ti one might have been from Revenge of the Sith too, because George Lucas did it back then as well. But that shot was actually when Bail Organa sits down and hands Leia, baby Leia, over to his wife, and they sit there in that closing montage of Revenge of the Sith. On the railing, there's a little piece of decorative art that's shaped like a Star Destroyer. Why Disney doesn't do this, I do not understand. It would be so, maybe not photographs, but just little nuggets. The Acolyte, Ahsoka, all these, Lando, for crying out loud. Like, I get it if there's shows that they still aren't 100% sure of what's going to happen, like Rangers of the New Republic. But if you are going to be putting out and allowing writers of a new Star Wars film, like the Kevin Feige one, to make general statements, why not give just a little tiny nugget of information? That's all that I'm saying.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
Listener feedback this week, talkshownerd@gmail.com. GameStation3 writes this, in reference to last week's JJ Abrams interview. Technically, Abrams did not actually mention Star Wars in the quotes provided on the Collider article. I think people on social media were putting words in his mouth. Yeah, he's right. And he didn't mention Star Wars in any of the comments that he gave specifically to Stephen Weintraub in the other Collider interview we mentioned today as well. Yeah. No, a lot of people are sort of, it's subjective. They're taking what he said and applying it to whatever fits their head canon about their feelings when it comes to the sequel trilogy. Javier writes this. I have to say I'm so excited with the upcoming Star Wars live-action series, in particular Obi-Wan. Now I am enjoying Bad Batch. The first chapter is amazing and catching up with the Clone Wars. The first season was kind of hard to watch, but it is getting better. The future looks awesome. Hopes include some new movies, with things to watch on TV, but cinema, it's one thing to watch things on TV. But the cinema is something else. Javier's 100% right. I went out and saw A Quiet Place 2 over the weekend and loved that movie and loved going to the movies. Thanks for your podcast. I enjoyed them very much several times while I'm out running. Well, be safe, Javier, and thank you so much for writing. Almara Williams writes this. The only thing I'll give the trilogy credit for as a whole is the undeniable connection between Rey and Kylo. I can't give The Rise of Skywalker that much grace. They knew better. But it does sort of point to, again, that was the A-plot. They had a plan for the A-plot, and I believe that they saw the A-plot through. All right. Friend of the show, Brian Martin, writes this. Let's see here. Was the ending of The Last Jedi really setting up Kylo Ren to be the Rise of Skywalker's villain, or is it just what some people assumed would happen? Well, I think it's just what some people assumed, would happen. This goes back to having a plan or having another writer, do more than one film. When you get to the end of, and I suppose I should probably add this, Brian, and thank you. I'm glad that you wrote in because you make me I can revamp some of my commentary from earlier. Talking about where things were at. The death of Snoke does lead to a question at the end of The Last Jedi that JJ Abrams has to handle, and that is, what do you do about Kylo Ren because he is supreme leader now? And again, I have no problem with them bringing back Palpatine. But I can see why people perhaps would have liked it more if they had just left Snoke in place and then finished his story in The Rise of Skywalker. Now, boy, voice crack there. That being said, personally, I dig the fact that we're getting Snoke stuff now. I dig the fact that we've got Snoke in vats in the, we have cloned Snokes in The Rise of Skywalker, and that we've seen him in the comic book now, and there's some potential indication that maybe in the Mandalorian series, the reason why they want Grogu's blood is because of the end count, and how that might be because this is all setting up to either mess with or fill in some of the gaps of Palpatine, or perhaps he needs it because he needs to create Snoke. I dig all this stuff, and you wouldn't have gotten any of that necessarily, right, if things hadn't played out the way that they did. All right, let's continue. Eliezer Rodriguez writes this: I'm a big fan of your show. Thank you. And if I mispronounced your first name, I apologize. I'm emailing you today because I'm very tired of these so-called fans/podcasters like Rebel Force Radio and FJ DeSanto, who have no clue what they're talking about or even watching. Stating that John Boyega had every right to be angry over his treatment of his character when that's so far from the truth. Finn played a huge part in 7, 8, and 9. I agree. Especially The Rise of Skywalker. FJ even said he should have been more heroic. I mean, how much more heroic can you be when you're leading a group on horseback attacking a starship? Also, it irritates me to no end the fact that said podcast could have the nerve to call sequel trilogy lovers apologists. Sorry to be negative, but I had to get that off my chest. Love your show. Keep up the good work. You are truly a Star Wars fan. May the Force be with you. I agree with a lot of what you said. I will say this, though. I do disagree with this. It's not that they don't have a clue in what they're talking about or watching. It's just their perception. The problem that I have with comments that get made on shows like, on occasion, I like Rebel Force Radio for the most part, but comments from FJ DeSanto is that they act like it's the definitive truth. Like theirs is the only version of the truth, and everybody else who disagrees with them is wrong. And that goes to the sequel trilogy apologists, anybody who likes them. I agree with you when it comes to Finn's role. I think a lot of these people that didn't like The Last Jedi and didn't like The Rise of Skywalker, they kind of got their arguments early on, and I think a lot of them never went back to reread or talk or comment or to rewatch any of these movies to really get into thinking about it. They kind of went down a single path like a Finn thing, his character was wasted, but they don't bother to go back and actually rewatch The Last Jedi through a lens of let's pay attention to Finn's character or The Rise of Skywalker in that way. But to each their own. Our one true emperor writes this: I agree with everything you said about The Rise of Skywalker. It's by far my favorite Star Wars film, with so much depth and psychological nuance, especially with Rey and Kylo Ren and the beautiful conclusions to their arcs that gets ignored due to people not knowing how or not caring to analyze film characters and character arcs due to misplaced hate or just a pack of knowledge. Regardless, The Rise of Skywalker is supreme. The way The Rise of Skywalker completes Rey's arc on its own makes The Rise of Skywalker incredible. Thank you, one true emperor. I'm glad you have found a happy, positive Rise of Skywalker place in this podcast. K. Gee says this: thanks for speaking out about the trend to be negative about everything. I saw the same article, but I couldn't stand to finish it. I completely agree with so many of your statements. Thank you, Kay. All right, and we wrap up today, I think. Yeah, we do. Friend of the show, Miranda Alicia's got a lot to say. So let's get into it. Talking about The Rise of Skywalker, she says, there also might be some connections to Dark Empire as well. I won't say who revealed those observations, but it's clear that the sequel trilogy did, in fact, draw inspiration from some legends and expanded universe, not just the original trilogy or prequels. Yep. They just didn't go whole hog with those connections like some wanted them to or were led to believe. Honestly, what has been revealed from the comments of JJ Abrams, or at least the conversations around it, what most people are saying right now in their podcasts or tweets, is nothing new. We may never know the truth about all that has become of the sequel trilogies or the making of it. Even in a 90-something minute documentary, we've not been given everything that went on behind closed doors. There could have been 1,001 ideas that we may never know about. Perhaps they could have included things from Legends or the expanded universe, which is what many wanted, what many fans wanted, but maybe not so much the general audience. It might have worked for fans, but not a general audience. So who knows what we would have gotten if there was a plan, or if we had the same characters or different ones while still having the old characters come together one last time. All that was certain was that there was, for a third time, a beginning, a middle, and an end. While we could look at the interview from Collider and deem it controversial, that unintentionally started another week's worth of drama and people being silly about how they see it as that it's opening up a door for more curiosity, not just about the past or the present, but possibly the future. What may not have ended up on the cutting room floor for this trilogy in Disney's first few years of Star Wars. Maybe it's meant to happen or appear at another time. Try to look at it like that. I do not think you could have been and then switching gears here, she wrote me a couple of emails. With the name change of the show, Star Wars Reporter, Miranda writes this: I do not think you could have chosen a much more appropriate title to your channel, because I think going forward, there's going to be quite a lot to report on. Next up, can we ask ourselves a serious question here? Can the entire internet that's centered around and latches on to movie discussion and fandom, myself included, can we take a moment to get out of our heads or off our phones and other devices and ask ourselves a really serious question? What movie or what set of films, or better yet, piece of fiction, not only on camera but also in print, have one storyline or idea that they stick with the entire time without changes or editing, or in a situation where they feel like they may need to start over when that's not what happened? When George Lucas did the first draft of Star Wars 2 or 3 years before its theatrical release, he spent more days thinking and being in the same spot than writing things down for 8 to 10 hours and call it a day. Do you realize we could have had a Star Wars that did not have the same Luke Skywalker we know, right? We may never have had Darth Vader in our lives, but here we are. Did you know that Disney's Beauty and the Beast had a completely different story? One, the entire team of animators had to throw everything away and presented an entire story in London with storyboards. Even the director for the movie was different. This is what happens in our industry. Nobody knows what they want out of the outcome and stick with it. In fact, the outcome is what gives people something to think about. Maybe, I might be wrong. I think the thought of, or the concept of, whether there was organization is more subjective and opens up dialogue that has people looking at this from a certain point of view. And last week showed nothing different with that kind of mindset. You almost expect it to happen in this fan base. That only makes the conversations about the sequel trilogy more interesting. Yeah, you know what? It all comes down to subjectivity, and I say that probably every single show, right? You get, you get out of Star Wars what you take out of Star Wars, and I love almost all of it. The stuff that I don't care for as much, that maybe, isn't aged appropriate for me, or just things I don't particularly care of, I watch less of. The things that I love the most, I watch more of. I watched The Rise of Skywalker again this weekend because I just think that is a fun, fantastic Star Wars movie. All right, that was a big show, and I talked a lot. I hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as I did recording it. And just one last promotional plug for a new sponsor to the show, Enso Rings. High quality, 100% silicone rings, really comfortable, and you can get your Star Wars versions of The Mandalorian, Darth Vader, Grogu, R2-D2, C-3PO, and a Stormtrooper. Remember, free shipping when you use the code Star Wars upon checkout at ensorings.com, ENSO-rings.com. As always, you can support the show as well by not only picking up this fantastic accessory, but also going to Amazon.com and looking for EMBARK and Jon Justice and picking up my science fiction space opera series. 5 books available now, all in ebook, paperback, and audiobook. If you're a science fiction, Star Wars, space opera fan, and you're a reader, and you haven't picked these books up, you need to go and do that because they're awesome. And I wrote them. That's why I can say that. Book 6 and 7 will be out later on this year, and you can get more details at mynerdworld.net. All right, that wraps up My Nerd World, the Star Wars Reporter. Thank you so much for checking out the show. We'll be back again next week, and I look forward to hearing from you, either from your comments on YouTube or talkshownerd@gmail.com. And I want to remind everybody that if you are listening to this on YouTube, you can go and get the My Nerd World Star Wars Reporter podcast on almost every single podcasting platform. So if you want fewer ads than the YouTube video version, go and grab it at whatever podcast platform you normally use. All right, that's it. We'll talk to you again next week. Have a great one. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.